All right. Good morning, Center for Spiritual Living, Palm Desert, and friends all over the world. Good morning, Jeffon. How are you, my friend?
Doing really well. Good morning.
Looking good. All right, cool. It is Tuesday. That means it's Rev C and Jeffon time as we continue to navigate through the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And so grateful for everyone that tunes in every Tuesday. I love hearing feedback and when I interact with some of our community members through the course of the week, how meaningful this Tuesday time is for you. And I know, Jeffon, too, that every time we're done, for just, not only do I get so much out of reading our chapter, but then our discussion, and then our discussion plus the reading gives me so much to process, metabolize, that I'm so grateful for these times that we shared together. So, thanks for Tuesdays, man. Tuesdays with, what was that book? Tuesdays with Maury?
Yeah.
You know that book?
I think so. Yeah.
About I think it's what Jerry Maguire, the movie Jerry Maguire was made from. It's about the sports agent.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, this is Tuesdays with Jeffon, and we're so grateful for him. What's on your front burner, man? How you feeling? How's your family?
Everything is going well. I had a very unique situation this past week that required me to sit with physical pain due to when I was younger. I played a lot of basketball, and long story short, 3 teeth got knocked out when I was younger, and one of the teeth isn't doing the best, and so it had to be removed, and all of this hammering into the jaw and everything. And there was an interesting moment that I was able to get to where I was able to kind of see the silver lining or the blessing kind of hidden there. Is when you're dealing with pain, physical pain, there seems to be a space that we can get to that is beneath the pain, where I like to say the spirit is, or the essence of my being is, that isn't actually afflicted by that pain. And it's when I disconnect or I'm not fully aware of that essence that the pain can overcome the body temple, so to say. And being that the spirit, mind, and body are interlinked in this experience, we feel it all on a variety of things. But it was a very interesting experience. I don't need to go through it again, but I gained some lessons from it.
I've got it. I personally can relate to that when and we're going to get to the book, gang, but I'm going to take a little bit of a different spin on what Jeffon's sharing. When we were kids, my brother and my cousin and I were playing baseball, and I pitched it to my brother, and he hit the ball right back into my face, knocked 2 teeth out, one of them being right in the front. So many years later, they put the tooth back in and did some stuff, but I had to get an implant as well. And they're up, they're up in there. It's not pleasant.
Yeah. And
so while the implant was healing to the bone, I had this thing called a flipper, and it was right in front, Right. And so I'm up giving a sermon at Genesis one Sunday, and my flipper flies out of my mouth. So I'm intimately familiar with the that was more of a ego discomfort than physical discomfort, but I can relate, brother. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
The flipper flew out.
The flying flipper.
The flying flipper, right in the middle of a sermon. Yeah. So anyway, just got to take it in stride.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you're. Any insight that could come from anything is a beautiful thing. I'm glad you've made so you can access, now that you've accessed that, you can access it again.
Yeah, and it's always there. I mean, even as we're going through these conversations, which I second what you said, reading it has one level of understanding. Having a conversation with you and as other people chime in brings an entirely new perspective, and then leaves me with an opportunity to really sit with some of these ideas as we go throughout the rest of the week. And again, I just want to thank you, CSL Palm Desert, Dr. Joe, Jeff, Reverend Lori, everybody who helps to make this possible. It's something that has been very beneficial in my experience, and I'm appreciative to be a part of this.
Rock and roll. Yeah, me too. Me too. Hey, are you in what South Dakota? Or are you home?
No, I am home.
Okay.
COVID spiked incredibly in North Dakota, so I made a decision to present my keynote tomorrow virtually, which will be fine.
Lovely. All right, let's see. I am passing the ball to you. I don't have an actual golf ball. I've got this thing, but here we go.
All right. And I taught this here. There we are.
There we go. All right.
With that, so we are on chapter 13. I will do a little screen share here so everybody knows my kind of flow here. So chapter 13 is focused on space. As always, Rev Charles and everybody who is chiming in, this was another concept that unconsciously was there, but I didn't really link the pieces together. So I'm appreciative for the way that Dr. Kendi goes into describe this particular chapter. And as always, we kind of start off with those definitions that he leads the chapter with. And so space racism. Before I even read these, I'm like, okay, I think I understand it. But a powerful collection of racist policies that lead to resource inequity between racialized spaces or the elimination of certain racialized spaces, which are substantiated by racist ideas about racialized spaces. Those are a lot of words there.
It's a lot of words. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm. Here's what my thought was. What the heck is he talking about right now? But I also knew, okay, we're going to unpack it over the course of the chapter. So
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And space anti-racism, a powerful collection of anti-racist policies that lead to racial equity, what we are aiming to achieve, equity and equality between integrated and protected racialized spaces, which are substantiated by anti-racist ideas about racialized spaces. Okay, that's a lot. That's a lot of words, but as Rev Charles just said, we will unpack it as we go throughout this particular chapter. So with that being said, I have a few other here.
Hey, Jeffon, can I ask you real quick, well, before we go to the next slide, how did you read that? I mean, it's a lot of words and it was a little confusing. Were you able to extrapolate, even before reading the chapter, extrapolate his meaning from that before, or was it more helpful to unpack? Sometimes my brain is just like, wow, this is fascinating information, but the illustrations and the stories and the data that comes along with it really helps me to unpack it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that there were some things that I was able to glean from the definitions, but definitely it was brought to life as I went through the chapter.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right on.
Okay, so I'm gonna share this screen and you can see that, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Space. There we go. Yep.
All right. So with that being said, on page 166, these are a few points that stood out for me. Please, everybody, as always, if you have insights, thoughts, suggestions around what I'm sharing or around what you read, please be willing to chime in. It's always appreciated from our end. And these are things that stood out to me. This is not something that everybody should have gleaned from this chapter. These are things that stood out to me, and obviously Rev Charles will have some that stood out for him. So one of the main things that kind of popped off the page, so to say, was this idea of Eurocentrism. And I know we talked about this in the past. And on page 166, he says, looking out at the worldview from a European center, which was taken as the only point from which to see the world, through European culture masquerading as world cultures, as European religions masquerading as world religions, as European history masquerading as world history, theories gleaned from European subjects masquerading as universal theories. And Rev Charles, this really, it kind of popped off the page because of the way in which systems, educational systems, the history that we are taught is always through this lens of, it seems to be predominantly through the lens of Eurocentric viewpoints. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's just me or if that's something that you also have recognized.
Well, what's interesting to me about this, Jeffon, is the word masquerading, mm-hmm. which to me actually fits in one way. It's the idea of manipulation, of manipulating somehow. You're masquerading, you're pretending to be something. But does it go back to the things that we talked about before as far as whoever's in power actually has the power to construct the narrative. And so from a Eurocentric viewpoint, European Eurocentric viewpoint, and we're going to get into this, I know as well, Jeffon, but he's going to talk about resources and what's available to a particular race group in a space. That whole idea of masquerading it kind of reeks to me of what he's been building on. Of if you're in power, you get to form the narrative, and so then you get to infect and affect people's viewpoint because of that.
Yes. Yes. Now, there was a particular point in the early chapter where there were a few messages that were shared. From intrigued to hear your thoughts about it as well, Rev Charles. So
cool. And everybody, I hope some comments are coming in. So yeah.
Yes, and everybody, please, not just the two of us. Though, if you want to practice this fishbowl exercise, no problem. We will.
We're in the bowl, baby. Let's go.
All right. So pulling this up here. All right. So as he said, oh, this is great. Now I can see it very well. All right. So his professor Amma Mazama, she taught him that the power of the spoken word is in the power of words spoken.
I love that.
I mean, that is profound. One of my mentors says, the more you talk, the less you know about what you're talking about. Another point, it's impossible to be objective. Instead, there is this collective subjectivity. That is something that I had to pull out the dictionary again to remind myself what objective and subjective are. But in that conversation, it's really aligned with a lot of what we talk about in Science of Mind, this collective consciousness.
That's it. Exactly. Yep.
And so we believe to be what is true based upon what people have passed down to us, or the race consciousness is pushing forward. And even the objective things that we aim to gain insight or knowledge or measurements from often replicate our preconceived notions as what we believe to be true.
Yes.
And this is what my mentor, who was a chemist and one of the first Black chemists at the department chair at the University of Utah back in the 70s and early 80s, he left science because and started his own consulting firm because he was saying that it seemed as if they were continuously trying to prove the things that they've already proven to be true. Therefore, to remove the experimenter from the experiment was something that science has had a difficult time in doing, to separate the observer from that which they are observing.
And that fundamental idea that the observer fundamentally affects that which is being observed. Yes.
And therefore, he asked, if we can't be objective, then what should we strive to do? And this is the point that I almost just stopped and closed the book and said, that's enough for this chapter. Just tell the truth. That's what we should strive to do, is to tell the truth. And in these conversations that Rev Charles and myself, even Dr. Joe and myself have been having over the course since May, in these conversations about racial inequity, about systemic issues, that is what we are aiming to do. And I know that we all can agree that as we stand behind CSL Foundation and New Thought Principles, telling the truth is such a powerful and profound and courageous act. I mean, that is something that I'm hoping that all of us are willing to do. Tell the truth, not just what's happening out here, but also about what's happening within ourselves.
Yes, and that's that idea is important to me as well, because the truth is an individual thing. It's a place that we arrive. I've found it's a place that we arrive based on our experience of life. Tell the truth. But here's the next part of tell the truth, ... I would offer to Professor Mazama is, can we have a dignified discourse while everybody is telling their truth?
Yes.
That's because my truth is going to be different even from yours, Jeffon, which is going to be different from the guy that lives in Alabama, the guy that lives in New York, the gal that lives in Minnesota, India, et cetera, but have dignified discourse about what our truth is. And I love that, though, but that's, if we can tell the truth and then actually listen to each other, progress can be made.
Yeah.
I would add that.
That's a great point. It's a great point.
And I agree. I mean, it's, yeah.
Yeah.
If I start using more words, I start sounding dumb, basically, according to your mentor.
Hey, there are times, particularly when I'm doing events and just rambling on, and I catch myself internally like, okay, let's take a step back, maybe ask another person's opinion. This is not all about you. That's something I've had to come to terms and grips with. So you're telling me this isn't all about me?
Is that what you're saying? Okay.
So there were a handful of points that I didn't want to just type an entire paragraph on the page. So I'm going to kind of point out a few paragraphs that stood out. One is on the middle of page 168, where he kind of begins to have this conversation about space racism. And he was talking about Temple being centered in a part of Philadelphia where it's a community that is predominantly Black and not as wealthy or well-to-do as other neighborhoods. And he said Temple's poorly paid security guards required anyone entering the hall or other campus buildings to show their university IDs to prevent those two worlds from meeting, the poor Black world and the affluent or middle-class white world. They were worried about safeguarding their white space inside North Philadelphia's Black space, but they could not understand why we worried about safeguarding our Black space inside of Temple's white space. And he goes on to say, the idea of the dangerous Black community is the most dangerous racist idea, and it's powerfully misleading. To that point, he takes it a step further and says, and I'm on the bottom of page 168 going to the top of page 169.
Okay.
For instance, people steer away from stigmatized Black neighborhoods as crime-ridden streets where you might have your wallet stolen. But they aspire to move into upper-scale white neighborhoods, home to white-collar criminals and banksters, as Tom Hartman calls them. During the Great Recessions, which was largely triggered by financial crimes of staggering enormity, estimated losses from white-collar criminals believed to be 300 and 600 billion a year, according to the FBI. Comparison: the height of violent crime in 1995, FBI reported a combined burglary and robbery cost to be $4 billion. And he's just talking about this disproportionate way in which we'll stigmatize certain neighborhoods or certain individuals while completely disregarding other criminal activities. And he says it a step further as with the crack epidemic. The crack epidemic.
Yeah.
Over 3,000 more Americans died from alcohol-related traffic deaths than from homicide due to crack. And he's just kind of really starting to show the difference in comparison of those two spaces and the individuals within those spaces and how we stigmatize them. So I will stop there.
Yeah, and the perception that's created. You know, it's actually giving, again, it comes back to information, real information and data versus perception. And one actually has, you know, one's fact. It's a good distinction. One's fact and another somebody's truth based on what they're ingesting.
Yeah.
And then digesting.
Yeah.
Information that is factual versus a warping of reality. Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's data versus what it's just an important thing to unpack. I mean, and again, oftentimes are we being lazy or are we being proactive? Are we willing to go to the next level and actually find information, real information, or are we just taking what we hear and regurgitating it? And that's dangerous. That's dangerous. Yeah.
It really is. It really is. Yeah, it's such a powerful point. I mean, yeah, I will leave that there. So when did we give up our ability to make our own decisions versus being told what we're supposed to get or do?
Well, we haven't. We relinquish that if we choose to, but we haven't. And I think that's I think it's important to. Well, I think Public Enemy. You got to take your power back. That's the. I mean, you got to take your power back.
Have you heard of that? The Strangest Secret by Earl Nightingale. It's an old recording.
I don't think so.
It's probably in the 50s or 60s, but the strangest thing. It's incredible. It's maybe 19 minutes, but what he's really diving into is this power that all of us have that we often will push off or default or just simply not embrace, and that's the power to use our own mind. Something that something that science of mind, something that New Thought teaches us, our ability to, it's always there, our ability to simply think. But conscious thought and directing those thoughts you have to be aware, and it takes effort and energy. It's easier, in my life I found, to just simply default to unconscious habitual thought patterns that I don't even realize that I'm thinking. And so really diving into that concept and embracing the power of the mind.
Do you think, Jeffon, that's a distinction that he's making too, or that his professor made between that it's impossible to be objective, that we're all part of a collective subjective? Because that's what objectivity takes dominion over your mind. It actually takes the capacity to witness something rather than be part of what you're witnessing. It actually, you have to witness it. You know, I think that's I think that's part of the distinction as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Thank you. I like to make good points from time to time.
Congratulations. We're done.
Thank you. Thank you, brother. Thank you, brother.
So with that being said, let me pop over here. All right. So page 171. And I hope I didn't. Okay, I didn't.
Can I, Jeffon, real quick? I want to, at the bottom of 169, I want to highlight one more. Policies of space racism, policies of space racism, over-resourced white spaces and under-resourced non-white spaces. And I know he's going to get into this further, but it's an interesting idea that he tees up there.
Yeah.
That we're going to get into.
No matter the conjoined twins, remember?
The conjoined twins. That's it. Yep.
So I'll touch on a couple of things, and then please feel free to chime in. I think this is kind of in alignment with your point there. On page 171, he's talking about to be anti-racist is to recognize there's no such thing as real world, only real worlds, multiple world views. This can be a spiritual practice. And I found it, and I'm sure that you might agree to this. When you travel to different parts of the world and you're around different cultures, suddenly you start to see the small peephole that you've been viewing your world through. And you start to recognize that there are multiple ways that individuals see the world that are equally valid as your own. That realization for me was a kind of a shattering type thing, where kind of to my point where I was teasing. So you're saying it's not all about me. It's a humbling thing to recognize that the way that you see your world is just simply that, the way that you see the world, but no greater than, no less than, and equally valid as the way that other people view the world as well.
Yes. And I think that's important from an experiential and experimental standpoint. Why travel is so important. To actually go to a different culture and ask. And what just ask, you know, about whatever. Just inquire into how people live.
Yeah.
And what comes of that is I had a different thought, and it's gone. It's gone. But that is important. Why to get out of your own? We have to be willing to explore and to be curious and to travel and to experience other ways that people live. In my travels, what I've found is that we're all doing the same thing within the context of our own culture. That's what we're doing, living. And there's things that make it complicated and things that simplify it. And yet, travel, if we're traveling with an inquisitive mind, we learn so much from that.
So true. Yeah, it's a really great gift. So to your point that you touched upon on the bottom of page 169 around the divvying of resources.
Yeah.
On page, I believe it's 172, he's stating about unfairly comparing black spaces to substantially richer white spaces is something that continues to overlook, ignore, see inferior those particular black spaces when you compare them in this capacity. And he's talking about HBCUs particularly. And he said the endowment of the richest HBCU, which is Howard, was 5 times less than the University of Texas, Austin, and 36 times less than Stanford and Yale. And that racial wealth gap produces a giving gap. And that giving gap then extends to a state funding gap. And so resources help to define a space, and resources are conjoined twins that the conjoined twins divvy up.
Yep.
And I think that was a really fascinating point, because I've heard, and I've been victim of, and not been victim of, I've actually participated in, and I think it gets to this a little bit later in the chapter, but seeing particular businesses that may be minority owned and not giving them the same benefit of the doubt that I would give another establishment that may be owned by a European or a Caucasian or a white individual. And this chapter really made me see the way that I've participated in these perceptions that are existing in my mind as to whether I'm giving them the fair shake, and also recognizing the way that resources fuel various spaces that I find myself in, and trying to step back and observe that instead of just jumping to conclusions and or judgment of the entirety based upon one experience that may have rubbed me the wrong way.
How were you informed? Were you aware when you do that, Jeffon, that how you're informed by that? Like what motivates you to choose to make that choice, one business over another? Are you aware in the moment, or are you just kind of in the subjective autopilot, I guess?
Unfortunately, I'm not as aware as I think that I should be in the moment. That's been a practice that I've been carrying with me.
Well, it's not a condemnation. It's just a question about awareness, right? Because I've done the same thing a million times.
Well, this chapter, one particular instance that kind of popped up in my mind, I was in Atlanta in June, and I'm vegan. So everywhere that I go, I like to find good vegan restaurants. When I'm in Palm Springs, I go to Palm Greens. I go to a variety of places. And there was an incident where my buddy and I went to this Black-owned vegan shop in South Atlanta, in a predominantly Black neighborhood. And we called in, made our order, and it took about literally an hour and a half to get our order. And in this whole time, I was getting upset. I mean, not upset where I was saying something mean to people, but I was frustrated. I was hungry. I was talking with other people outside who were also waiting for it. And not once did I stop and think about other times where I've been in other establishments where I experienced the exact same thing. And I didn't take the step to then ask myself, did I have the same reaction emotionally in those spaces? Completely disregarding the fact that this is an establishment in an area that isn't the most affluent in nature. Completely disregarding the fact that this was during COVID and they had a limited capacity of workers in the shop itself.
Mm.
And that required me from this standpoint. And I did it, this is what, 4 months later. But this is a moment where we can always begin to tell the truth, where I can take a step back within my mind and ask, why did I act in a certain way, whether those actions were physically or just mentally happening inside of myself? And how can I be more aware and attentive of these emotions when they are bubbling up within me? And I guess that's really going to the concept of emotional intelligence and mindfulness.
Someone at the door?
Yeah, someone's at the door.
Hey, who's at the door? Do we have a special guest?
Carry that thought. Let's see.
Who's at the door? I'm on pins and needles. Are we getting sandwiches delivered?
So let's see. Special delivery. This is a package for my wife. She told me to be on the lookout. FedEx is dropping it off. So
are we going to open it in front of everybody or going to leave that private?
Yeah, you know, I'll leave that for her.
Okay. What? So when that makes me, it begs the question for me, when is that not about race and about just time and being hungry? And is that up to the individual to discern that for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, it does. I think that it does have a lot to do with that as well. I mean, but there are some things that I have to also capture in my mind and ask, you know, how am I internally playing this game of condemning or pointing a finger or judging one establishment when it's not equally in another establishment? Because I've been at True Foods, which is a very nice vegan place in San Diego, and we had the same experience. Not one time did that thought pop into my mind of, well, what's going on here? You know, I was just sitting there, my wife and I were chatting, the same as me and my buddy chatting. And sometimes I've been harsher on minority-owned businesses than I have on white-owned businesses. And that is just an acknowledgement that I know that I have to be aware and attentive of and work on.
Yep, I hear you. I hear you 100%. There's a sushi place we used to go to in Oceanside, and I think this is an example of white privilege. Actually, for me, I can't speak for my family, but the three of us went in there and we were ravenous. We were so hungry. We sat down and we started demanding. I mean, we were obnoxious. We were so hungry. Can we have this and this and as quick as possible? And we are actually, once we got some food, I noticed that all of us, well, at least me and Julia, were embarrassed. Like, our behavior is not good. Yeah. And I can't, you know, I it's embarrassing sometimes. So I'm relating to that. You know, I just want to ask the questions, you know, is it, but what I came away from that, and I think one of the most important things too, Jeffon, is self-reflection and knowing what our own motivation is.
Yes.
And when we can be aware of that, we can say, okay, for me, I'm aware that I was leveraging privilege in that moment.
Yes.
And so acting a fool in that restaurant, probably we could get away with something that other people might not be able to. And it's humbling.
It really is. And it's coming back to that concept of telling the truth, or at least acknowledging the way that you're showing up and not trying to hide, skirt away, or ignore that. Because there are all areas that I know I can work on. And I think he kind of clarifies this a little bit better, that the point that I was trying to make on the bottom of page 172. He's talking about the hypocrisy of a young lady who went to his same HBCU and was kind of condemning them based upon one experience they had with an advisor who didn't send over the transcripts in time.
Right.
And he said, at the time, I could not be angry at her without being angrier at myself. How many times did I individualize the error in white spaces, blaming the individual and not the white space. How many times did I generalize the error in the black space, in the black church or a black gathering, and blame the black space instead of the individual? And I think that that's really the point that I was trying to emphasize. And as I've heard many people say, it's the idea that the white man's ice is colder.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, totally.
Go across the street. I mean, oh, you should taste the soda drink, the pop, the soft drinks that they have in their cooler. I mean, it is pristine. Well, it's the same as this establishment over here.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
yeah, it's embarrassing a little bit, and well, a lot of it's embarrassing, and he has a theme through this book that I really appreciate, where he continues to encourage us to bring it down to the individual level, not the race level, not the group level, not the whole level, the individual level. And that's where we find the most integrity in relationship, because it's the only one we can really understand, as far as I gather. The interaction that I have with this person. Can you clarify, is it an individual racist problem versus white only? Is that for me or you, Jeffon?
I think that's for us.
You take it. You take it. Is it an individual? It's both. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that it's both. And to the point that throughout this book, and one thing that really stood out for me is the realization that racism exists from all shades of the spectrum of humans. And so I can be racist towards a variety of people. I can discriminate. I can have implicit bias around particular people. And to my point, the problem at that vegan restaurant was the owner, who was a chef, answered my phone call and took my order, but didn't give the order to the lady, to the person to ring it up to then get the order made. On the flip side, the lady who didn't get the order was extremely kind, extremely helpful. And so I was attaching that to the space, whereas at True Foods, it was an error with the waiter, who was a younger white woman, and I was upset with her, not at the space. And so that's kind of how I was able to kind of walk through this. So
Understood.
And I don't know if that answered, is it an individual racist problem versus a white only? I think that it's we're talking about the spectrum of humanity here.
Enough said.
Any other points with that?
No. We got 20 minutes. Do you have some more slides? I'm a stickler for time for some reason when we have this. I mean, there's no reason we shouldn't go over if we need to.
Yeah. Well, you know how we can get. Sometimes we're 25 minutes or 35 minutes in, and we've talked about 2 pages. So we're making good progress today.
I love it.
So I would like to share a few things on page 173 that I'll open up the slide here, and we can have a little conversation about it. And it's on the bottom of page 173. There are a few particular points about the history of space racism. And he begins by saying in 1811, Thomas Jefferson was ultimately saying, we need to civilize and emancipate the Negro and send the Negro back to Africa to carry back the country of their origin, the seeds of civilization. Obviously, African Americans at that time said, we don't want to go back. This place of America is rightfully our home. We've helped to build it. It's literally been built on the backs of our ancestors. And the blood of our ancestors. In 1859, there was a Debo's Review, or maybe that's Debo, I don't know. And they were talking about this white spaces, and it goes on to page 174. A moral, happy, involuntary, industrious community of free Negroes, but concluded no such community exists upon the face of the earth. Yeah. So this was the space racism, ultimately saying that there are no happy, moral, and industrious Black communities throughout America. And then the final point that I'll touch upon here and then kind of bring it back for a conversation. And I don't know if you've heard of this, Rev Charles, but that 1865, in the midst of the Civil War, when they gave a lot of acres, hundreds of thousands of acres to African Americans in South Carolina and the Georgia coast. And they, with the idea of integrated and giving them, that common concept of 40 acres and a mule, land where they can begin to develop and build their legacy, so to say, in the same way that the Americas were doing for the white settlers westward expansion. They were giving away land, and rightfully land that was unjustly taken away from the native and indigenous communities. Yeah. And we know that they were giving them land just freely to begin farming, to begin building, to begin creating cities. And so they were doing this with African Americans, individuals that were just freed from slavery. And as you might imagine, I don't know why this is a pattern in American history, but after they gave that to them, June of 1865, so that's what, 6 months later, roughly 40,000 blacks had settled on 400,000 acres before Confederate landowners, aided by the new Johnson administration, started taking back their land. And this is a story that is
their land.
Their land. Yeah, their land. This is our land.
I got to get that in there once, brother.
Yes,
their please. Land. Yeah.
And this is a story that is highlighted extremely well on that 1619 project that the New York Times did. It's a podcast that I would encourage people to listen to if you haven't already. And that's where that whole concept of 40 acres and a mule kind of comes in.
Yep. Yep.
Their land.
Their land. Yeah. Not before you showed up here.
Yeah.
To the next page.
Yes.
Whenever black people voluntarily gather among themselves, integrationists do not see spaces of black solidarity created to separate black people from racism. They see spaces of white hate. Mm-hmm. They do not see spaces of cultural solidarity against racism. Again, it's the ingrained, like, we want to have our own space, but it creates this idea of otherness.
Yeah.
When otherness is not intended.
And we're seeing that today we saw that also with Black Panthers. We saw that in gatherings of African Americans and even just people of color in general. Suddenly that's a sign of anti-American or anti-white, and it prompts this fear. And prior to the civil rights, that was sufficient cause to go in and lynch those or trap them in a church and burn the church down, because you're not supposed to do that. You're anti-white. And it's such a deep history. And even so much so, Native Americans, they weren't able to practice their religion until the 1970s.
Yeah. Because
their religion was seen as something that was evil, for lack of better words. And what did America, throughout history of America, what happened is they would literally go take their spiritual elders, their spirit, the head people of their spiritual tradition, and lock them up in federal penitentiary, and there's no way they're going to get out.
Yeah. Do you remember last week we talked about I think we both saw this information that I think the generation before, the latest generations that are coming up now, a number of them believe that the Holocaust was a hoax.
You mentioned that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the importance of understanding our history. How much do you think that plays into the importance of us going forward? We talk about understand your history so you know where you're going or know where not to go. When you talk about, the Native Americans, and when we talk about Black history in our country, in the United States, and things like that, how important do you see that, Jeffon, as being a guider and how important it is to understand our history so that it's something that we can probably suffer with a little bit, but also be inspired by to go in new directions. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I personally think that it's one of the most important things that we can bring to the youth. And it cannot be kind of to the point of the beginning of the chapter, European cultures as world cultures, but really being able to pull back the curtain and reveal the underbelly of history that we easily ignore. And obviously, we need to be aware of that. Otherwise, it's just out of sight, out of mind, and we often will continuously repeat that which we haven't gained any true knowledge or wisdom from. And so I think that it's essential. It's the same as when we're studying science of mind or new thought, to not just stop with the latest book that somebody released, but go back into the archives. Look at Ernest Holmes, look at Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, look at Ralph Waldo Emerson, look at even going all the way back to ancient Egypt, and not the Arabian, so to say, but the African Egyptians. Go back even further. Look at things that happened when Paramahansa Yogananda is expressing his history and lineage in India, and really start pulling up this information that is always there. And the richer we are in history, the more we can move forward and create a culture, hopefully, of equality and equity. So I think it's imperative.
Amen. Cool.
Yeah, that was a long answer to it.
No, it's a perfect answer. I just want to get out of your way because we got more to cover, and I love that. I believe that as well. We must, even the history of our own individual lives.
Yeah.
What have I done where I've screwed up that I want to learn from, or that's worked well? The mistakes I've made, the blessings that I've had, start to create some formulas for what works.
Yeah.
And what doesn't work, and then discern.
Yeah. And I just want to shout out Todd. He said, "Thank you, my beautiful brothers, for sharing this conversation. Thank you for tuning in and sharing that comment."
Hey, Todd Falk. Good to see you, brother. Right on. Cool. All right.
So
how much more do we have, bro?
One more point on page 175 is talking about this separate but equal type of philosophy.
Yep.
And in 1930, segregationist Alabama spent $37 for each white student compared to $7 for each black student. Yep. Georgia, 32-7, and South Carolina, 53-5. We're talking about a distribution of resources here. And so
this is all within the context of integration.
Yep. Yes, and the separate but equal philosophy, which we know that, as he mentioned, to compare a certain space that is fueled or pumped with resources to one that is not that even playing field or that equal comparison. And then he touched upon the Board of Education case in 1954. Based upon that study and this is on page 176, so maybe I could pop up here. Let me share my screen so I'm not looking down. Just a few more points, Rev Charles, and then
we're good. We're good, my friend. We're good.
So the Board of Education case, and I think we've all heard or seen that study that was done with dolls of different skin colors. And he mentions that white social scientists argued that the harm could be permanent, which was a kind of a thing that helped to fuel, at least to rule on this particular case. And I'm going to be touching on just a few points here, but the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously agreed to separate children of color from others of similar age and qualifications solely because of their race generates a feeling of inferiority as to their status in the community that may affect their hearts and minds in a way unlikely ever to be undone. And therefore, it opened the door to integration. But as Martin Luther King said on page 177, I favor integration on buses and in all areas of public accommodation and travel. I think integration in our public schools is different. white people view black people as inferior. And he's talking about this in 1959. People with such low view on black race cannot be given free rein and put in charge of the intellectual care and development of our boys and girls. And he takes it a step further with some stats that said, when black and white teachers look at the same black student, white teachers are about 40% less likely to believe the student will finish high school. Low-income black students who have at least one black teacher in elementary school are 29% less likely to drop out of school and 39% less likely to be among very low-income black boys. And that was a point that I thought was really, really incredible to kind of point out.
Agreed. And it takes me actually to the next page.
Yes.
On 179. Can I flip ahead? How many more slides do you have? I don't want to steal.
I only have one slide left, and that's the takeaways that we can carry with us.
Love it. So in the last paragraph, the author says, think about the logical conclusion of integrationist strategy. Every race being represented in every U.S. space according to their percentage in the national population. Black, 12.7% persons would not see another until after seeing 8 or so non-blacks.
Right.
Latinx, 17%, 17.8, not see another. Latinx, someone that looks like them after 7 or so, et cetera, et cetera. Asian, 4.8, Native American, 0.9, white, 61.3. And this is the idea of integration. That's the idea that hit home with me. Is it's still disproportionate. It's not necessarily a supportive environment.
Yeah.
Or an empowering environment. And, it's also, Jeffon, the thing that's, I think, particularly powerful is that it's an unwritten story. It's an unwritten story. So we have this information, even with the author, I would gather. I mean, I hope at some point we can get the author to sit with us for an hour. There's no end to the story. There's just it seems to me it's like the United States of America. What it's meant to be is an unwritten story, with a story that continues being written without an end, and that we're charged with the same thing now in these volatile times and these crazy times to actually continue writing the story with the arc moving in the direction of justice.
Yeah.
Harmony.
What an incredible realization to recognize we're in the middle of a chapter, and we are literally the authors collectively, shaping the course of the direction of the country. Well, first of our individual lives, of our households, of our neighborhoods, of the organizations we're a part of our community, our towns, our cities, our state, nation, and ultimately the world. And to embrace that level of responsibility and power that we've come into this earth possessing, to use those faculties and tools that we've been provided before we took our first breath, to allow in shaping or steering or directing or coloring this canvas of our world. I mean, that is such a powerful realization and revelation.
Big time. Big time. What are your takeaways, my brother?
So a few takeaways for everybody. You know that I like to try to share some tangible things that we can carry with us. So these are my suggestions. Okay? Let's see if I can get my screen shared here. All right, I will share that right now. So first and foremost, recognize the power of the words that we speak and the thoughts that we think, to really capture the essence of that power, not just realizing the words that are out into the ethers, but what is the power within us that is enabling us to speak, that is enabling us to think, bringing that back to principle. What does it mean to speak and, most importantly, live in truth, or to live truth? What does that mean to you? Not what somebody else says it should mean to you, but to you. Spend reflective and meditative time with the ideas that challenge you most in this chapter, end this book. I just took my case off, but end the book. Identify and act on at least one activity that you can do to bring these anti-racist ideas into your present reality. Remember, nobody is going to do that work for you. And most importantly, know that you are guided, that you are directed, and that there are people who await your life.
Yes.
People who are walking this planet or have yet to even take a breath yet in this realm, who are waiting for you to shine your light in the way that only you can shine that light. So those are a few takeaways for all of us to hopefully just carry with us as we move throughout this week.
I love it. You see that in most cases, the reason for the difference in dollars for resources in schools is based on local tax income. This is why busing was, yep, that's tax allocation. Yep, and that's part of the system. Hey, Jeff, can you come out from behind the curtain real quick? Are you there? Are these slides that Jeffon makes made available to everybody?
When he shows the slides, yes, sir. Everyone that's on the show gets to see that on YouTube, our website, and also on Facebook.
Okay. Are they saved anywhere? Well, they're saved as part of the show.
They're part of the show.
Okay.
It's up to Jeffon if he would like to share those, and he can just send them to me, and I can certainly put them in the chat.
I can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's no problem.
Nice.
We've lost your voice there. We don't.
Am I
know what
back?
you're laughing about. Yep, there you are.
Oh, I'm laughing at myself. I said we're going to have to ask Jeffon how much he wants to charge for those slides.
I mean, let's see. I have 123 so far. Chapters, about 8 to 10 per chapter. So
8 to okay. We'll figure it out.
I would happily share.
Love that. Well, just the takeaways, Jeffon. I think that's important.
Yeah. I want to kind of quickly touch upon Madeire's point around local tax income. And if this is a concept of the United States, then wouldn't it seem that even if local tax is higher, let's say in Laguna Beach, as compared to Watts or Compton or another community in LA, wouldn't it seem that as a United States that we would find a way to not continue to perpetuate a resource distribution?
Yeah, you got distribution. Yeah.
Yes. Wouldn't it seem as if we would make sure that we flow those resources equally to various schools and systems to ensure that all the youth of this nation are able to receive an education that allows them to be the best that they can be going forward? And that's just a thought.
Yeah, well, I think we'd like to think that, and I know that before going way too far down that rabbit hole, I know that plenty of states are subsidized by the federal government as well, which we all make up. But I think one of the principles upon which Centers for Spiritual Living is living is a generous sharing of resources. And I think that's what you're talking about, Jeffon, if I'm correct.
Mm-hmm.
A generous sharing of resources. And I think that's a movement we want to continue to move in the direction of.
It's possible. We humans, our consciousness is helping to create the world that we are in. To think these ideas that are outside of this present paradigm is not far-fetched. It just simply requires a shift in the way that we are showing up and the way that we are doing things. It's more than possible. Just as the potential is within all human beings, so the potential to bring peace out into the world is possible, but to the degree that we are willing individually to expand beyond our present confines of our perceived consciousness into the infinite realms that are available for us all.
Yeah. What we're called to bring forth, I agree with you. That's an extraordinary point, is to bring forward what we're talking about. And that's why we're talking about it, right? We believe in something, right, Jeffon?
Yeah.
An idea that there's a sharing of resources, that if you actually share your resources, you're not going to live in scarcity. You'll still live in plenty, but others will have as well.
Yes. Nature is continuously giving.
Yep.
So anyways.
Right on. What a program. Another Tuesday in the books, brother. High five it. Bam.
Thank
That's
you.
Jeffon Seeley. We're so grateful for Jeffon every Tuesday. I know Dr. Joe gets back pretty soon. I'm going to miss you, man. If he decides to take every Tuesday, I'm going to be very upset. All right.
We can have a three-way conversation.
There we go. Now we're talking. That'll be rich. Yeah. Awesome. You see a link there on your screen, folks, to support our community. We encourage you to give. We appreciate it. To continue to support our center in all that we're up to. These Tuesdays with Jeffon. Tomorrow's Sensational 6. Thursday, I'm with Dr. Will Coleman again, which is he's a walking treasure trove of awesomeness, wealth of information, being able to speak the languages, the ancient languages that we can interpret scripture through to actually understand what was happening back in the day and to bring it forward into today is a beautiful thing. And then the week goes on. Life on Love with me on Friday. I just want to tease that a week from Friday, I'll be with Sharif Abdullah and Commonway, his Commonway Institute out of Portland. He's traveled the world. We're seeing it right now. Calendar of events is coming up. The week is on the website, cslpalmdesert.org. And also to see any of the archives of our shows, you can go to our YouTube page, Center for Spiritual Living Palm Desert. It's all there. Just go in there and have some fun. cslpalmdesert.org. I would call it the Disneyland of spiritual center websites. Is that too much hype? Anyway.
I was exploring it just the other day.
There's a lot going on, a lot of stuff. We got a blood drive coming up. Look at that. Yeah, go to the website. We've got a blood drive next Friday here happening at the center. So we appreciate you. We love you. Jeffon, any final words, my friend?
Just thank you to everybody in CSL Palm Desert and continuing through this conversation. Next week, we're on chapter 14. So if you want to start reading or if you are reading along with us, and I took off my cover, so go ahead and get the book. And other than that, thank you, Rev Charles. I really appreciate it, and I really value these Tuesdays.
I do as well. Thank you, Jeffon. I appreciate you as well. Everybody, I encourage you to make it best day ever. Peace and love.